Kristen, this was something that you actually brought to my attention. So tell me about the state of Illinois and mandated LGBT curriculum.
Yeah, did you hear about that, Masood?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I was reading the news the other day. It was interesting.
Yeah, so I guess it's not just Illinois, it's also, New York, California, Colorado, New Jersey. If you're gonna buy new history textbooks with government funding, which helps when you're buying books for however many students in your school, the history book needs to include a section about LGBT history and how that's contributed, and also a section on unions and how the unions have contributed to the formation of our society. Um, yeah.
And one thing that I think is really kind of scary is it mandates no pupil shall be graduated from the eighth grade of any public school unless he or she has received such instruction in the history of the United States and gives evidence of having comprehensive knowledge thereof. And that seems like it's pretty vague wording to what, having comprehensive knowledge of how the role of, unions in society is. But I think that this is something that I really don't agree with, because I think that that's essentially, trying to mandate that identity is very important. And, I don't have as much to say about unions as somebody next to me is going to. But let me ask you this, Masood. How do you feel about that sort of mandatory education being, like, let's say it's federally then going to be the case? How would you feel about that being mandated education?
Um, I mean, so the thing is, like, I was actually reading about it the other day. So it was all about knowing about the history and acknowledging the fact that so many other people in the past in our history that kind of had an impact on the society and the history. It was they were, I don't know, a part of the LGBTQ community, and that's not a bad thing. That's a part of the
Hmm.
history. Ignoring them would be something wrong for sure.
Yeah.
But mandating it into the school, if that means that students are going to have to learn about how that community works, or what sexual orientation is for a fourth grader. I don't think that's actually that's going to be good. It's just a little bit too early.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the requirements for Illinois, it's K through, is it K through 12?
K through 8.
K through 8. Like, we have a first grader this year who's not even thinking about dating. Like, kids don't think about dating until they're, what, fourth grade? Like, I remember my gym teacher came into our fourth grade classroom to give us the talk, but it wasn't about sex. It wasn't about, like, whether somebody is male or female. It was, you kids are smelly and you need to wear deodorant. Like, and that was traumatizing to a fourth grader. Like, that's the kind of, like, environment that we grew up in. I don't think that fourth graders or younger, or any kid, if no kid needs to worry about the sexual preference of anyone. They shouldn't be thinking about that.
Hmm. Well, one thing that I think I kind of want to play devil's advocate on this one is that I don't think that this is necessarily like sky is falling legislation. As you were saying, Masood, this is definitely more about like the history and the roles of these sort of people in society. But
Let me ask you then, who is being left out of the history books for their contribution to society because they were gay or because they were LGBT? Like, are people intentionally being left out? Because if that's the issue,
mhm,
then we have something to talk about.
yeah,
But if it's, hey, we need to give people LGBT role models by telling you, everyone that Marilyn Monroe slept with, like, that's not necessary to history.
mhm,
What's necessary is what they contributed,
mhm,
not how they identified.
yeah, not their identity. And to be able to finish my point,
Sorry.
this isn't. I don't think that this is a case that this is. We're going to be teaching people what LGBT. Well, actually, I don't know that. I don't think that it is sex ed for LGBT. I don't think that it's comprehensive, instruction of how to integrate this into your life. That's not the impression that I get of
It is
this.
though. Like, when I was reading about how classrooms plan on implementing this,
Hmm.
a second grade teacher is recommended that she read a story to her class that has two moms in the family instead of a mom and a dad.
Hmm.
Like, that is social manipulation.
Hmm.
Like, parents should have a say
Hmm.
how we want family life represented to our kids.
Hmm.
They shouldn't come home and be asking, why does so and so have two moms, or what does it mean that so and so has two dads?
Hmm.
They might have
But
friends that that's a thing, and I don't know.
essentially, I think what you're saying is that if it organically happens, that's something that can be handled on a case by case basis, but it's not the role of the state to kind of create that conversation. That
Yes.
if the state feels like it is its role to create that conversation, then that's kind of social engineering. Is that what you're kind of?
Yeah, it's being served to them on a platter of like social manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that maybe one of the very few good things about that mandation is that the same way that government always tries in terms of education, tries to get everybody on board, all the students on board with learning about the history of the minorities, right?
Black History Month.
This is, they are a part of the minority, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could be the ones who actually people ignore, or maybe even make fun of, bully. So those actually are a part of the vulnerable part of the community, and that's why the government kind of tries to be protective about them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good thing. That's a great thing. Like, if kids get to know them, but I think it's a little too early. That's all. And
You had brought up earlier, Kristen, about people needing role models, and that this that might be a positive aspect of this. But one thing that I think is important for people to look at is that I think that if you're a part of the LGBT, and let's say that you want to become a scientist, is it going to negatively affect your opinion of science if you don't have these role models? That's certainly a question that I would really want to see some evidence around, because I think, from just my rationalistic point of view, that if a person is great and they do great things, I don't think that there needs to be an asterisk next to their name that also lists their identities. Like Masood, if you become a very successful person, I don't think that you would want to be known as, Masood, CFO, also Iranian. Doesn't that almost seem like it kind of diminishes the gravity of your accomplishments on their own?
yeah.
Sid is already super accomplished.
I know, but he's not CFO yet. But
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is that I feel like people should be able to hold role models even if they're not of the same skin color, even if they're not of the same sexual orientation. If they're just good people that inspire you to get into something, that's what I think that kids should have access to. I'm not saying that, I'm definitely not saying that there should be people that are swept under the rug because they're LGBT. That would also be the opposite of what I believe, of trying to create that equality of opportunity. But it's not the state's role to be able to socially engineer people to, believe certain things. And I think that really, to the point when it comes to the union side of this, I think that that's pretty distinctly trying to socially engineer people and say, hey, unions are good, corporations are bad, and it has been that way forever, and it's that way now. Because that's kind of like the climate that we look at politically on a certain side of the aisle. So, but Kristen, you know a little bit about unions. Tell me about that while I go fill up my water.
Oh, bye. How am I going to tell you about that when you're not in here? I'm not a union fan. But Mr. Do you think that it's the government's role to protect people from bullying? And how?
I think, yeah, that's actually one part of the job of the government. One of the responsibilities that government should have, the government should have to protect its own people. So if I see that, for example, Eric is every day he's just he just mugs me on the street, I'm gonna have to have somebody to just go up to them and just protect them, right? I can sue them, and all that process is actually done by the government. So, with that example, everything else should be the same. If let's say I am different, nobody knows about my history, nobody knows about me. I'm gonna be annoyed in the society. People are gonna pick on me if they don't know me, if they're not aware of my situation. So that's the other, that's the thing I was saying about getting to know the LGBTQ community, getting familiar with it, and not only that, but also kids getting familiar, just kind of getting a little bit familiar with the situation, knowing that two men or two women being together is not that big of a deal, is actually something that kind of prepares their mind to be open to just everybody else, knowing that everybody is different, and they wouldn't be surprised to see that for the first time, I don't know, two men kissing in public. They won't be like, what? That doesn't change everything about their own, the whole thinking state.
So do you think that by introducing children to the concept of same-sex marriages at a very young and susceptible age, do you think that will lead to more same-sex marriages in the future?
People can do whatever they want to do, right? We cannot control people saying that no, you need to get married heterosexually, or you need to get married with the same sex. But what I'm saying is, it kind of makes it easier for a kid to understand that I'm not even talking about sex. Like I'm talking about just two people being together. Like if you see like as a kid, if you see two people kissing, like two men kissing, and if you're not prepared to see that, that kind of crushes everything you have built in your mind.
Yeah.
But if you're a little bit familiar with it, and you're like, okay, yeah, it's like I don't know, it's like this story that I read when I was like, I don't know, 2 years ago, when I read that story that this person had two moms or two dads or whatever. So a little bit familiar with it, not necessarily talk about what they do, what they do after that, but just getting familiar with the fact that two men could go out the same way that two kids go out, for example.
So how would you feel about, say, in a similar setting, still the same second grade classroom, a teacher is reading a book to the students, and in that book, one of the children in the book is naked? Would you feel like that also has positive, constructive, people, when they become adults, won't be as freaked out to seeing people that are naked? That's the same kind of logical.
So if they hear that one of the characters in the book is naked, and
If
then
they see that one of the characters, should they be able to see naked characters in a book? I mean, that's something that's natural. That's something that they'll inevitably see in their adult life. Shouldn't they be accustomed to that in their school?
oh, I don't think like being homosexual is similar to being naked, like in a picture. What I'm saying is that's a fact. So that's something that if people are different, they're different. Like they're interested in the same sex, when the kids get to know that, they're like, okay, so there is such a thing, and they can accept it as an early age. Maybe like not that early, but just maybe a little bit later, and they don't have to know about the whole sexual situation. It's just having two moms, or a guy seeing another guy, or a girl seeing another girl. If they are familiar with it, that's not a bad thing. They just knowing that two people can just go out, regardless of their sex.
Shouldn't that be a parent's choice, though, in how they raise their child, whether they feel their child should think that's acceptable or not?
I don't think that's something up to their parents. To be honest, you're a parent. I know I'm not a parent, so I don't understand like how that feels. Like knowing that your kid is growing up in a place in a society that everybody else is talking about homosexuality, and just pushing everybody towards knowing them, to getting to know what the concept is. But to me, knowing it or not knowing it, I don't think that's going to change anything about somebody's sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm. So I think that we're definitely talking about the L and G side of the LGBT side of this issue, but then you kind of get into, I think that where people kind of get a little bit more off the beaten path of this is when you talk about people like members of the trans community and that sort of thing. How do you guys feel that this changes the conversation when it's not just a matter of, we're reading a book about, to a boy who has two dads? What if it's then a book about a boy who decides that he's now a girl? Like, this is something that I think is a little bit different, because then you get into the can of worms about transitioning children and that sort of thing. How does that play into it? How does that potential education differ from, say, just the lesbian and gay side of it? How do you feel about the idea of transitioning being a part of education in the same way that lesbian gay couples would be Masood?
Oh, you're asking me. So I think the way that I should look at it is that, okay, so let me put it this way: we all have our own preferences. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have different ways of doing things, and if I cannot make an informed decision about my life, then that's I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna go the wrong way. But with me knowing of something, if I'm like at a certain age that I can understand things, I don't think that's gonna have a bad impact
Mm-hmm.
on my decisions. So about like when let's say as a kid reading a story about somebody who transitions, I feel like the government tries to find a way to let's say that you have a different sexual preference, you have different sexual preferences, but you're in the closet, you don't know, like not that you don't know, like not everybody else knows about that. So giving this courage to you to be yourself in front of everybody else, and knowing that nobody else is going to make fun of you or pick on you, that's actually a great thing. So
But people
maybe
are always going to pick on somebody. You can't just legislate away, children are going to pick on other kids,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What's that?
Like, isn't it inevitable that children will pick on someone?
That is true, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the LGBT community.
I'm not saying that it should be. I feel like I need to share, and this doesn't apply directly to what we've been talking about so far, but there are people in this world that are born with multiple parts. They don't fit into women or men category based on how they were born. I actually had a very close friend in high school who at the time was a guy, identified as a guy. You know, I found out from him after high school that, you know, he was born as male and female. And then he decided to choose, you know, if he wanted to be a woman or if he wanted to be a man, and he was deciding to change his identity. I don't have anything wrong with that. I felt just as fondly towards this person as I did my whole high school career. You know, I just feel like I need to put that in there because I'm coming off as very anti-LGBT community.
But was that your I have black friends?
No, it's whatever. Maybe.
I'm not racist. I have a black friend.
I just don't think that the government should be able to tell my kid that this is okay when I don't think it's okay. I don't think that, you know, in one of these articles that we read about schools integrating this into the curriculum, one of the parents was a 30-year-old with a born son who, at 3 years old, she says, as soon as he learned to talk, he identified as a girl. He told her that he was not a boy, that he was a girl. And this 3-year-old is now on drugs to transition their physical body into what they self-identify as. That, to me, is child abuse and should not be allowed. Anybody? Silence.
Yeah, no, yeah, that was actually deep, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
But,
what is going on in that household that the child at 3 years old identifies the difference between a male and a female based on genitalia? Like, there's something wrong there.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily based off of genitalia or not. I don't know. I do know this. It seems like fairly often my 6-year-old and my 3-year-old look at me and say, "Mom, I mean Dad." Because it's just a matter of that they look at us in that same sort of provider type thing. We're family, and the titles don't necessarily get mixed up. That doesn't mean that I am a woman in their eyes. Like, you know.
Kids don't have that understanding. Therefore, parents should not have the right to medically transition their child's physical body for them without their adult consent.
Yeah, and I think
let me ask you something else. If let's say I, as a parent, I actually have a kid who, let's say at the age of, I don't know, maybe 12, that kid feels like they're attracted to same sex, right? And then if I know that the society is not ready for such a horrific scene, how am I supposed to feel, you know, when my kid leaves home to go to school?
I don't understand.
So when I know that, you know, the society is not ready for that yet, but that's what my kid feels, right? When you put yourself in that parent's shoes, you see that, oh, okay, so I think the government should do something about it and let everybody know about the fact that people are different, they have their own preferences.
No, I'm sorry if I'm just taking over the conversation, being forceful, but everyone has insecurities. You know, I was always insecure about always being the tallest girl in every single class that I was ever in, sometimes the tallest child in any class I was ever in. I never thought, hey, the government should protect me from being the tallest. Like, everyone has insecurities. They're just called different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that maybe the point that you're trying to get across is that it's, you know, an adequate role for government would be making sure to ensure equal protection under the law and equal opportunity under the law for these classes. You know, I think that it's the libertarian standpoint to say that the government doesn't need to be able to tell who can get married and who can get married. But it's also not the role of government to say, okay, you know, this is the social normal. It is up to society to say what the social norms are.
But do you think it's a violation to your right if the government teaches your kid about, you know, LGBT community?
I think that you're getting close to that because, you know, public school is like, as it stands with the current education system that we have, unless you have a lot of money, your options are basically homeschool and public school. Like, these are the options that we have. Now, if the government mandated, you know, if a government mandates things that one doesn't agree with, I think that, you know, that presents a problem to those sort of people that have no other opportunities, because maybe homeschooling isn't going to be able to afford the same educational opportunities. But let's say, you know, let's say that this is I hate to go back to like the example of like evolution versus creation, that sort of thing. But it's like, I wouldn't even necessarily even agree with that point, but I know that some people would. I think that if I don't think that the government should have the right to be able to teach children things based off of an agenda. I think that if there are things that present themselves as having, factual basis behind it, having, scientific evidence, and that's a field of science that should be taught, part of like the STEM field, that sort of thing. But it's like if you get into like ideological grounds, and you can make the argument for the LGBT movement about whether that's ideological, but I think that the union component of this is definitely ideological. That like it's not the government's job to, within public education, mandate ideological training, because that's that's where like the tyranny begins.
Well, that's what they're doing. What is happening is political agendas. The politicians are trying to grow their base. They're doing that by allowing these political ideas to influence schools. So the LGBT community is naturally going to say, yeah, we want to be in the history books. I'm going to vote for this person because they did something for me. But that doesn't help our kids learn how to read. That doesn't help our kids learn how to do accelerated math skills. Like, that's not helping. We're graduating kids that don't know how to read. Like, shouldn't we focus on that rather than on some political, like, growing of a political base?
That's true, but something that you see right now, government is doing great in terms of science and math. Yeah, of course. But
Are they though?
what's that?
I think last time I checked, like America was rated like very, very low amongst the developed countries in the world in things such as science and math. Now that assumption could be out of date.
I'm generalizing a little bit, saying in science, math, technology, right? Compared to so many other countries, I'm not going to say we are the best, right? I'm not going to say that. So we are better than so many other countries, but at the same time, that's a social science. That's a part of the social science that I think kids needs to learn. That is, knowing about, let's say, knowing about the society, knowing about the differences between people, and everything is not just numbers and words just next to each other and just learning them or memorizing them and passing the exams. It should be something, to learn about other people around us. And the problem that I see right now, in technology and science, we might be good, but when you look at it in a social context, that's we might not be really good. We see a lot of socially awkward people, or we see sometimes if you see racism, or if you see violence against some certain groups of people or some minorities, that might be something as a result of only focusing on words and numbers and calculations other than the social sciences.
I think that where you and I might be disagreeing on things, Masood, is like, in my mind, the role for the government should provide the baseline where we can all interact freely. And I think where your line is the government should be helping above that baseline to give us more things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just getting familiar with you. Like you two, as parents, you have some guidelines and you have some beliefs that you would love, your kids to have them, right? But at the same time, listening to somebody else, living in a society, you might see or interact with some other people that are different. The same things that we learn when we live in a society outside of our family, the things that we learn as an adult, these are the things that you learn from the society, not from your family. So I think a part of the job of the government would be accommodating those settings so that people can learn them in a safe, peaceful way.
Do you think that the government should enforce students in public schools having to learn about the variety of religions in this country? Should students, in elementary school have to learn the differences between Jews and Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and etc.?
Not that much into details, but maybe just getting familiar that people are different. That's it. Like, people are different. Like, everybody needs to know people are different,
but
and it's cool. It's okay.
Part of the beauty of children is they look at people and all they see is another person. They don't see all the differences that adults see, and that's what makes children amazing. I don't think that we should interfere with that innocence.
Oh, it's because you think because they're innocent, they just look at them and I say it's a different person. They don't care.
They don't care what color they are.
Yeah, I honestly think that children have to be taught to be intolerant of groups of people, and I think that extends to race, religion, sexual orientation, preference, all that sort of thing. I think that parents definitely have the first right to be able to teach their children, and I don't think it is right for parents to pass on their various isms to children, but I don't think that it is the role of government to have the first say in legislating, their beliefs at that point. Like, I don't think that it is the role of government to enforce people's belief. I believe that it's the role of society, of communities, to be able to kind of set the standards for what is right. Like, if you live in an area where you don't feel welcome, like, you have the mobility to be able to leave in a lot of different cases. Like, it's not up to it's not up to the state government of Alabama to say, people here, need to be re-educated towards this. Like, we need to start teaching these children what we believe is right, and take that right away from the family unit, because for good or for bad, people have people should have that first say over what they teach their children. And that's just, I think, how a free society should function.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So
what you were looking at in numbers? Is it science, mathematics, reading?
Yeah, what I looked into is it shows that there are some significant differences when it comes to the developed world versus the United States. And when it comes to the field of mathematics, the United States is actually below the average line of the polling data that was taken that shows all these different countries, but mostly developed ones. Like, you have the United States in the sciences that's below, some of the well-known ones. You have, like, Japan, you have Taiwan, you have Canada, but you even go down to, like, places like, Switzerland, you have places like Taiwan, you have Estonia. These are all, there is about 20 other countries here that are listed as being above the United States in the sciences. In mathematics, it's even more. It's probably more like 35. And it's a very similar story when it comes to reading comprehension as well. So I don't know that necessarily changes, whether I don't think that it changes whether kids should be accepting of other human beings and not judge them based off of, like, what their preferences are. But I think that the core issue that is definitely my sticking point on this is that children are malleable. Children are going to form their identities based off of what is around them. And if they're in a good family unit, they're probably going to end up being as good people. If they're educated on certain matters, they're going to be thinking more about those types of things. And I think that once you start to mandate what education is teaching kids, if there's even, like, a hint that there's an ideological reason behind that, then you really get into an area that I definitely don't agree with. That is just not the government's role, in my opinion, to have that sort of say. Like, I think that first right comes down to the parents, because I think you can look at a number of different cases where government stepping in does not create the optimal environment for anybody involved. So,
but just right now, Kristen said that about that medical thing, which is changing the sexual orientation or sex organs of a kid. Parents shouldn't be able to do that. Government should get involved. So that's another thing. That's a different point of view that Kristen was saying. Kristen, what do you think about what Eric said?
Yeah, I guess you did point out that it's different. It is kind of contradictory in a way, but.
Well, here's the thing: is that there are definitely certain things that I don't think that you can do to children and still be, essentially doing right by your children. Like, we do have child protective services to make sure that if you're not feeding your children, or if you're only feeding your children, cantaloupe, that this is not going to be something that is permissible. You're abusing these children. It is not the right of parents to be able to, do sexual things to their children. Like, that's wrong. It creates problems for the children psychologically. You shouldn't be able to molest your kids, that sort of thing. And the fact of the matter is that children develop a lot. The brain develops a lot. I heard somewhere that, like, your system that determines how you feel when it comes to, like, how your body responds to your hormones, it doesn't stop developing at the age of 3. It doesn't stop developing until, like, the age of 23. So having a parent that just decides that they're going to add chemicals to their child to be able to halt puberty, to be able to reverse puberty in terms of how their children are going to develop, like, that's impressing upon children an ideology that could potentially be very harmful, because it does, in most cases, permanent.
It's permanent damage.
Yeah, essentially it's permanent damage if you're looking at the difference between how a human normally develops versus how that altered development is. And that's, it's...
If you're not allowed to give your child a tattoo, you sure shouldn't be allowed to change their sex, right?
That's true.
It should be pretty obvious.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think that a big problem is that it's become something that is kind of trendy. Like, people want to be the one that they can have, like, that conversational talk point. Like, I'm not going to say that this is what it is, but there are syndromes out there where parents will attempt to get their children sick in order to be able to get attention. I think it's like Munchausen's by proxy or something like that. I seem to remember, and it's just like these are things that we would never tolerate. Like you wouldn't tolerate a parent feeding their children toner from an ink cartridge in order to get them to go to the emergency room. You know, why is it then okay if they're just a different type of chemicals that are going to make a lasting impression upon their body? You know, called it damage, and that, you know, if you compare the difference, it really is.
Gotcha.
So.